Anya Dickinson Cove.
And I'm Linnea Alexander, and this is Crash Course History.
Out of all the topics he covered in his World History series, I have to notice that John Green conveniently forgot to address the ever so important topic of feminism.
Now, Anya, let's not make negative assumptions about people that we've never met. I'm sure John Green is a perfectly nice person who's just—
Down with John Green! Down with men! Who run the world, Linnea? Girls.
Anya, you have a lot to learn about feminism. But don't worry, I got you covered. Feminism isn't actually about women taking over total matriarchy and damnation to all men. Especially nowadays in our greatly technology-filled world, due to media and copious new ways to publicize and spread information, feminism has taken on a seriously negative connotation. Take Anya here, for example. The stereotypical matriarchal radical feminist that we often summon to mind when we hear the label is simply that, a stereotype. Feminists don't place themselves superior to the other gender. That's ridiculous. Nuh-uh. Guys have cooties.
Yeah, boys go to Jupiter to get more stupider.
Girls go to Venus to get more genius.
Oh yeah!
No, us from the past, you're supporting the stereotype. Gender equality.
Women have played many different roles throughout history, but as a group have generally been characterized as the docile domestic members of society.
However, not all societies subscribed fully to the standard of patriarchal norms. For instance, the Egyptians had many female rulers, including Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, and of course, Cleopatra.
The most blatant exception to this general patriarchal trend, though, was, wait for it,
the Mongols.
The Mongols held men and women in equal value and roles, holding both genders equally responsible for providing food and protection. This codependency on food supplying shows up in gender equality issues more than once. Some of the very first societies in the world, also nomadic, displayed similar equality between the sexes.
But despite these exceptions to the standard viewpoint of women, the female half of society, more often than not, has remained subordinate and oppressed.
At least that was the case until the time of the European Renaissance, when female intellectuals such as Christine de Pizan began speaking out for women's rights.
Modern historians tend to talk about feminism as occurring in waves. Not that kind of wave, it was supposed to be figurative. Anyway, the first wave of feminism arose greatly in correspondence to the Enlightenment in Western Europe during the 17th and 18th centuries, a time that spread new ideas about science and art and inklings of social equality throughout parts of Europe and, indirectly, the Atlantic.
The first wave of feminism continued all the way through the early 1920s, encompassing one of the greatest feats feminists have pulled off so far, earning women the right to vote. This massive movement, referred to as suffragism, involved at first the upper-class Christian women of Europe and the US who protested to earn this right. The Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, when 300 men and women rallied for the cause of equality for women, is what many historians recognize as the starting point of suffragism.
This movement gained momentum in the Western world, where protests, debates, and demonstrations rallied for support of women's rights for voting in the early 20th century. Took a while, didn't it, ladies?
Well, shortly after women in Western countries got the right to vote, sorry third world girls, you've got to wait another half a decade.
Keep waiting on the world to change.
The global community became absorbed in World War II. As countries mobilized their entire young male populations for military purposes, women stepped in dutifully to fill jobs at the factories that were previously unattainable.
This led to massive empowerment of the working females, best captured by the iconic image of Rosie the Riveter. But big surprise, when the war ended and the boys came marching home, it was back to the house for women, with huge layoffs in the female workforce as soon as the soldier returned.
Despite being regaled back to the family life, some of these women held on to the empowerment they briefly gained, and as they began to raise the families that spurned the baby boom, some taught their daughters that perhaps the cult of domesticity wasn't the only option.
World War II, in consequence, led to many of the important second wave feminists, but more on that later. Now we turn to the East, to the emerging feminist movements of the communist world. From the government rather than the civilians, and emphasized legal equality for women, as well as sexual rights and women in the industrialization process.
In Russia, this movement was characterized by the Zendodal Department of the 1920s, and in China was mirrored by the Women's Federation of the 1950s. However, as the communist regimes developed, their male leaders claimed to have solved feminist issues and greatly weakened the powers of their respective women's departments.
This led to a large amount of backsliding into patriarchal ways of past empires.
'Twas a shame.
And that leads us in to the second wave of feminism.
In 1963, as the baby boom was beginning to wind down but women were still regaled to the domestic life, a radical book called The Feminine Mystique was published. Written by Betty Friedan, this book critiqued the banality of women's roles, which consisted entirely of wife, mother, and caretaker for most women. At least career choice was easy. In her book, Friedan argues that such a life leads to the emotional and mental dissatisfaction that plagued many of her housewife friends.
As Western women read this provocative book, its message resonated, and the rest was, well, history.
Beginning in the U.S. and spreading to Europe quickly, women took to the streets to protest for equal rights in the workplace and elsewhere.
The second wave of feminist movements coincided with the other massive political movements of the era, including civil rights and anti-war protests. One of the main focuses of the second wave was earning legal and social equality for the genders. Women in the U.S. worked hard towards the Equal Rights Amendment that would guarantee this equality, and other countries worldwide soon followed in creating laws such as the ERA.
It is important to note that despite the immense protest and social awareness movements that led to the ratification of the ERA in 1972, it was never officially instituted into the Constitution, and it was instead left up to individual states to shape their gender policies. However, the new ideologies the feminist movements brought created vastly more liberal working places for women. Even so, the inequality in the workplace was still quite prevalent today, but more on that later.
Another aspect of the second wave of feminism is as important as the equal rights movement is the movement for sexual and reproductive rights. This massive upheaval of historic gender roles and sexual paradigms was initiated by protests against Miss America pageant in 1968 and 1969.
Feminists protested the ceremonies which they dubbed the cattle parade, since they painted women as objects of beauty dominated by the patriarchy that sought to keep them in dull or low-paying jobs.
One radical group known as the Red Stockings crowned a sheep as Miss America and proceeded to trash and burn objects of the patriarchy, such as bras, girdles, makeup, and high heels. Anya, those aren't red stockings. They're maroon.
We can talk about this later.
But
Linnea. What? It's time for the open letter?
Let's see what's in the secret compartment. It's a tiara. Dear beauty pageants, why do you even exist? I don't know. I mean, all you do is oppress and objectify women, and the only useful thing that you've done is spurn a feminist movement that basically denounces you. Not so best of wishes. Anya Dickinson Cove. Back to the thought bubble. The feminist sexual rights movement led to many new rights for women, such as abortion, birth control, and in some countries, maternity leave. It created new concepts and acceptance of gender, sexuality, and body image.
The second wave of feminism was very drastic in the Western world, but in the global South it took a different shape. In many areas, feminism materialized in the form of women's societies that offered support and protection for women, as well as playing a prominent role in their communities.
These groups helped empower women to help their families and start businesses. In areas of South America, these groups called attention to the massive problem of the capture and torture of government opposers and innocents alike.
In Islamic countries like Morocco, women rallied to be removed from the minority status and be recognized as legal equals of men.
Overall, a new global community emerged that saw women's rights as human rights. The UN created a convention to eliminate discrimination against women.
Feminism is a word that has meant countless different things over the centuries, from suffragism to social equality, and still something new today. Modern day, or so-called third wave feminism, takes shape in so many ways, be it through media, women's protective services in your community, or even the ongoing fight for women to earn equal pay for the jobs they do right alongside men.
In the US and Europe, third wave feminism does not take the starring role in social media, as issues such as gay rights, legalization of marijuana, and free healthcare have recently drawn more attention in the media. However, in many developing countries, gender equality is a more obvious issue, and feminist movements have really been beginning to take off and gain speed. As much as every wave of feminism has varied from the last, and taken on its own ideal for a world of gender equality, the underlying root motive has stayed fairly constant: a search for equality between genders in all aspects of life. Across the globe, feminist movements aren't over yet, but today is as far as we can talk about here. So stay classy, and thanks for watching Crash Course World History. Bye!